Our community team, we do a lot of demos and stuff, so we have like this practice demo file. So they shared this in the community, and then there were a lot of questions about, well, can I get a template that matches this? So we'll go through it. You've got the link here. I'll post the link in the chat as well while we're doing that. So if you wanted to look at that. So anyway, we'll go through it. So the question in the community was, well, can we get a template? So I looked at it and thought, well, this is probably easy enough to create some template elements out of. But then when I looked at what they actually built, there's a lot of stuff to get it to be a template. It's not as easy as like copying and pasting. So you have to break things, and then you wouldn't really have the template anymore. So I thought, well, maybe there are places where we can make little templated areas. So I'll start doing that, and then we'll share those, and then people can assemble the course their own way. But I'll go through, because there's one thing in there that I thought was pretty nice, so I built a little template around that, and there's a little animation effect. So today I'll show you the animation effect, and then you get the little template, you can play around with it. So if we click through this, you can see she built like a branching. Sarah, who was on the community team, built this. She built a little branching interaction, and you kind of go through. And then there's some decision-making things here. Let me just click through this real quick. And then, so as you go through these activities, this is the part I templatized. So I made like a ready or start screen. So we'll click on it, and then you've got to make a decision. You make a decision, and this basically, these are buttons, and then they go to a layer. And based on the decision you make, you're going to get this kind of like a results slide with feedback and this little animated circle. So I was going through there. Let's see if we can go back in there. See, it's not set to go back, but I'm going to show you how to build this. There was actually kind of a gotcha in here for me. I was looking at it thinking, well, this isn't working the way she's got it working. Why not? And then I realized, oh, there's a way that this animation works with shapes. And so I'll show you how this works, because the construction is actually pretty simple. So it's a nice little effect, but there is kind of a neat, like a little learning thing in that process. So let's go to Storyline. So this is the template. I'll just preview the template. So you'll get this, and this is available to you. You can download that. It's in the top right corner, right under the video on the resource page. So I'll show you the template part. I won't go through all of the template stuff. You can look at it. It's pretty straightforward. But what we have here is we've kind of got this decision screen, and you could, add whatever you want to and then change your links. And then in there, I created these kind of feedback screens. So you got these different things. So let's look at how it works, and then we'll start to build it piece by piece. All right, so let's go ahead and preview the scene. So you can see, it kind of comes in. You could just add your own text and everything in here, unless you have a course called Here's the Title. We'll click on the button, and it kind of comes in here to the next slide. And then these are just going to go to those layers. So I'll click on, I think, 3 will show us that. You can see a little animation, right? If I go backwards here, we'll click on, and you could see the animation. I don't know how well the animations show with the webinar, but they kind of spin in. So let's look at how that's built. It's pretty simple. I'm going to start with a blank screen. Well, I'll show you how it's built, and then we'll actually build it. So this is basically, if we come to the main slide here, right? We come to the main base slide. It's basically just 4 buttons. They animate onto the screen. There's 4 buttons, and then the buttons, if I look at it, they just go to their specific layers. So the way I did it is, for the template, I just did a 0 screen, and then I actually added 4 additional ones. I did like a 100, a 75, a 50, and a 25. And so I'm only linking actually to the 0, the 25, 50, and 75. But you can go in there and modify to any percentage that you want to do for your display. So what happens is, I'm inside of here. I click a button. It's going to take me to one of these layers. I come over here, let's say 75, and then when this layer launches, this is gonna animate in. So it's a number of components that are stacked together to create this effect. So let's go ahead and build it. So the first thing I want to do, and I just insert a circle. So we have a base, just because we get this gray, right? So we'll do a base here. I'm gonna fill it, so format, and then I can come up here and fill it. Now another thing in terms of filling, in working with the formatting, if you do Control Enter, for those who are new, Control Enter also opens up the formatting. So it's the same as if you come over here and click the format or do the Control Enter. So I'm going to fill it. One of the things with this template, and you'll see that, is I use the design theming. So for the colors on the spinning things, on the feedback little guides, those circles, I actually use the standard colors so they don't change. So there's always going to be red, red and green and whatever. The rest of the colors are all tied to the design theme. So this way, if you get that template, you want to use it, and you change the color design theme, it's going to work for you. So let's do this here. So we're going to just fill this with gray. So I'm just going to use, you can see here, I'm using the theme colors, right? So I'm just going to use this second level gray here. So this will be our base color and line color. I'll just do oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Solid fill, we'll go to line color and no line. All right, so that's kind of our base. I always like to title things, so I might call this like the base, for the meter or whatever you want to call it. And then the other thing I'll point out here is if I do Control Enter, or if I'm going to come up to the formatting up here, you'll notice that I can see the position of the object on the screen, because I really want to make sure that it's the same size, because I'm working with these circle shapes. I want to make sure they're the same size and they're in the same position, so this way they overlap perfectly. So I can see that it's a square, so it's 338 by 338, and then this is the XY position, so where it's at here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just duplicate this circle, just because we'll need a cover on top of everything. So if we come back here and look at this, here what we have is we've got a gray base, we'll have our color, and then we have this white cover on top. So it's like 3 parts, and then you've got your text if you want to add text on there. So we'll make this our cover, and I'm going to title this cover, just because it's always good to title things. And I'm going to make this a little smaller. Another tip if you're just getting started with this, if I hold the Shift key down and I start from the corner, it'll scale it. So it's not going to get all discombobulated. Let me change the color just so we can see it better. I'm going to make it orange for now, an orange color, just until we're done, just so we can see how it lays out. And you can see you've got your guides here, and then I'll make this probably a little bit bigger, and you can see I can position this. You'll see the little crosshairs here. If it doesn't position, like you can see, sometimes it might struggle, right? Depending on what objects you have on the screen. You can always select your objects, and then you have the Arrange tab up here, and then you can align it, and we can see we're going to do align by center, and then we'll arrange and we'll align by middle, and it should now be perfectly centered. So these are centered. I'm going to go ahead while I'm working. So this is my cover. It's on top of the base, and then we want this thing in between. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on my cover, or on my base. So I'm going to hide this cover in there so I don't have to worry about moving it. And then I'm going to go ahead and insert one of these shapes, and that shape is actually that pie shape, so we can change the percentage. So we're going to insert a shape. We take the pie shape here, and I'm going to insert it. And if I hold the Shift key down and drag it, it's going to drag it as a perfect circle. Now, if I don't hold the Shift key down and drag it, you can see it gets skewed. Let's say it's skewed. How do I fix that to get it to be a perfect circle? That's where we clicked on here, right? And we go to Format. We can see it's 338 by 338. So if I click on here and I make this 338 by 338, now it's the right size and it fits in here perfectly. Right? So that basically is going to sit on top. And then you can see within the pie shape, you've got this ability to change the pie shape, right? So you can, that's how you would get, like if I want 75%, I want, 45%, whatever, I'd kind of guesstimate that here. And of course, you got like 0, 25, 50, 75. So you can kind of figure that out. It doesn't have to be perfect for this type of display. So now if we take the pie shape, and I call this the color meter. And I'm going to put it underneath here. And then we're going to put the cover on top. So now you can see if this was white here. Let's fill this in with white. And you can see you've got this cool oval. So now you've got that effect in there. Now, one thing I notice I don't have, on the pie shape here, I'm going to turn off the line color. So no outline, just so it's a little. Now you could put an outline on there because like if you wanted to embellish it, there's a few things you could do. Like we could come over here. We'll exaggerate this outline. Let's make it a little darker. And then you could make the outline weight really heavy, right? And so that may have a cool effect if you want it. A lot of people add shadows on there. So like, for example, if you took the cover and you added a shadow effect on there, it may look like it's kind of floating, so it gets a little bit more dimension. So it's kind of like something floating on top of that meter, or you can maybe have the meter have its shadow as well. So there's different things you can do with that to embellish the look of it. So now let's hide the cover again, and let's look at the pie chart. And this is the nuance thing that kind of threw me off. So I have the pie, I want it to animate in. How do I get it to animate in? I just use an entrance animation. So if I select the color shape, right, I'm going to come up to animations up here. What I'm going to do is add an entrance animation, and I'm just going to use the wheel. And then right now it's set to 0.75 seconds. If I click on options, you can see there's different ways I can have the wheel look. I just want it to use this just single spoke. So it's just going to animate in one way. And then I'm going to click on that. Now this is square. So it's going to do this wheel animation. So the expectation is, where's that center point of the wheel animation? Since it's a square, the center point's going to be right here. Kind of, you could see that center point, right, the pivot where I'm moving. When I move the shape right here, you can see that's just the center point, right? So let's go ahead and test this. So I'm just going to play this slide, and this should animate in. And you can see there's the wheel animation, right? There's this kind of junky weirdness to the animation. I don't know if you noticed that. Let's replay this slide here. And so I don't know if you saw that animation had this weirdness right there. And that's kind of what I ran into. So I was trying to figure out, like, why is that happening that way? So let's cover it and look first. So if this was on my layer and I have this button, like right here, I have this button. Where's my button at? And I click, I'm just going to jump to the layer, and as soon as it gets to the layer, the entrance animation is going to trigger. And so if I selected something and it's giving me this visual feedback with the percentage, I think it's a nice, elegant look. It's visually really attractive. So it's a pretty simple thing to construct, but it's working with this. So like right now, if I have this shape and I want it to be 75, I can do that 75%. If I want it to be 50%, I can move it. So I can customize that. So if you want to just do like an average, medium, high or whatever, you can just do this little manipulation of this. If you want to get very specific and say, okay, this was like 22%, you can kind of ballpark the 22%, right? Because if I know this is 15, I got to figure like this is probably about 20, this is like 22. So if I wanted to represent 22, I can kind of ballpark it. So whatever your percentage is, you can modify that pretty easily. The trick here that I ran into was, why is this animating weird, right? So like I'm not going to move the cover because that's what I didn't want to do. Let me hide the cover. Let's look at the shape here and figure out how this wheel animation works. So if I put this here, and you said this is most of the shape is filled. If I preview this, And again, I don't know how much the webinar shows because sometimes it'll jog. See, that actually animated right from the center. Now, if let me close this. Let's come over here and move this. Let's make it less than half, so it's a little bit more obvious here. My expectation was that this animates still from the center. So when I preview this, but you can see it doesn't animate from this center. It actually animates from the center of the visible shape, which was a nuance which I didn't expect, right? I don't think most people would expect that. So I was looking at the things Sarah built, and her animations worked perfectly. And I was thinking, well, how did she get her animations to work perfectly? Because every time I animate it, if I again replay the slide, you're going to see the pivot point for the animation is going to be somewhere here, which is like the center of the visible shape rather than the center of the entire bounding box. So if we replay this slide here, let me replay this. You can see the pivot point is way off. And the reason it's off is because that wheel animation only works for what's visible. So if I create a shape like this, this isn't the center. The center ends up being somewhere over here. So how do I fix that? This is the clever hack that Sarah came up with. She basically filled the shape with a gradient fill. So let's look at that. So I'm going to duplicate this shape here. And you can see right now I've got the one color in here. And if I go to format, I just would go to shape fill and I can just choose another color and I can make it any color. I'm going to make the screen a little bit bigger so we can see it better. Let me move this over here and make my slide bigger. All right. So I can fill this right with a color, but if I use a gradient color, I can actually fill the entire shape. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to do a gradient color. And we go to here, gradient. We'll just select one. I'm just select the center one here. And so you can see I've got my gradient color. And then I'm going to change this fill here. Where did I put my fill colors at? Here. And let's go ahead. We're going to do 2 stops. So let's get rid of this third stop. And we got one at 50% right here. And then we're going to go to the first stop and we're going to change that here. Let's just make it gray, right? And then I think I need to change my type of fill. I'm going to do a linear fill here. And then this first stop should be gray. See how it's turning gray here? So we're going to set that at 50%. And we're going to do second stop. I'm going to set that at 0. And now what should happen is I start to move this out. You can see it's gray. See? So like half of the shape is going to be filled with the second stop, and the other half of the shape is going to be filled with the first stop. So now I've got this gray. And so what I can do now is I can get this to spin then on the center. So if we won't play around with the alignment here, we'll look at the one that I built here. So if I come over to, I think the 50% is a good one to look at. So if we could deconstruct it, right, we've got our cover here, and then you can see we've got this, and then I've got a matching the gray. There's my base, and then I've got this other one's the matching gray. Let me just do Control Z so it's lined up again, and then you can see I can move these around. I'll just move them so you can see how I can move them, and then basically what I want to do is I've got my 50% look. But because I use that gradient fill, I actually fill the entire shape. And so that changes that pivot point. If I kept it at 50% like I would expect to do, right, like we did when we were building it, then my pivot point shifts because the pivot point is going to be the center of the visible shape. But by adding that gradient, somehow that fills the entire shape. And then I can play around with the percentages like I would, with this. Oops, I messed something up. Playing around with it, but you can see then I can move those things out. And so now if I look at this here, what's that, the 50%? So let's preview this slide and we can see how that looks. I think this is 50%. There you can see. So it spun from that center point. So a little bit nuanced. It's kind of odd, right? In a way, it's not something I was expecting, but I thought, the effect is really cool. So if you wanted to build the effect, you're going to run into that thing with the wheel animation, which probably is an animation a lot of people don't use. And so I didn't know that the wheel animation actually only spun from the center of what was visible. So using that gradient and being able to fill the entire shape fixes that. So pretty cool. You've got the download file. You know, building the animation sequence is pretty easy. You've got the download file. You can play around with this template, so you'll get this whole template. We'll preview it again. Scene. So you'll get this kind of starter screen. You can add your content to it. It clicks to a decision-making screen, and you can add your own content in there and then link it to whichever layer you want to link it to, and then you could have a feedback screen for each button, and then it goes on to the next slide. One thing on the template, when you look at on the layouts, I created different layouts so you could change the backgrounds, right? So you can just go into the master slide here and change the backgrounds. So I did like a color. I did some pictures. You can just swap out the pictures. And then the other thing is I tied it to the design theme. So if you go, you can see here, the colors will change based on, well, let's just do it here because this one actually uses the colors. If you change your design theme, you can see the colors will change as well. So hopefully you get some value out of that. We'll do more about breaking those templates down, but that animation effect I thought was a really nice effect and something people can use.